It is a pleasure to welcome Dr. Erica Brown to this evening's program. Dr. Erica Brown is the director of the Mayberg Center for Jewish Education and Leadership and an associate professor of curriculum and a pedagogy at the George Washington University. Erica was a Jerusalem Fellow, is a faculty member of the Wexner Foundation, and an Avihai Fellow. She is the author of 12 books on leadership, the Hebrew Bible, and spirituality, and has been published in the New York Times, the Atlantic, Tablet, First Things, and the Jewish Review of Books. She joins us to discuss Looking Forward with Hope. After we hear from Erica, there will be an opportunity for a short Q&A. Please submit your questions using the chat box in Zoom. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Erica Brown.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really a profound honor to be with you tonight. I'm looking forward to having a good time with you, to doing a little study together, and also just to acknowledge how many extraordinary leaders have come from the Cleveland community. Some of my beloved friends and colleagues live and work there. And this is a special opportunity for me to acknowledge the role that Mort Mandel had in my life. I was a Jerusalem Fellow, a program that he sponsored, had the opportunity to meet with him several times to thank him in person. And so I want to dedicate my remarks tonight to his memory with gratitude, and to acknowledge all of those, all of you who got awards tonight, and the special work that you're doing, particularly at this time. So tonight, I want to study with you. I'm going to share with you my Mother's Day present before we start. It says, I will teach you in a room. I will teach you now on Zoom. I will teach you in a house. I will teach you with my mouse. So I thought that rather than the typical speeches of a Federation annual meeting, I'm so delighted that we have a time to work together to think a little bit about what it means to look forward, hopefully, cautiously. Things are opening up, but we're not quite there yet. And the expectations that we have of what will happen will largely determine the way that we look back on this strange time. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to drop in the chat room right now, just take a few seconds, what place you're most looking forward to going to when this is all over. Let me know, drop it in the box. I have heard that Mitchell's Ice Cream is having curbside service. And I'm just interested in reading what you write to me, so let me hear. Let me see. All right, barbershop. I actually cut my husband's hair, my dog's hair, my bushes, and didn't do a good job on any. Israel, the dentist, camp, Aspen, hair salon. Lot of hair salons are gonna have to support this community. A kosher rib burn-off, a Browns game, shul, a winery, concerts, Arizona, my parents' home, ballroom, playgrounds, movies, right? Dinners with friends. And I think as we start thinking about them, I see those exclamation marks of what it means to actually, get out to the places that define us and that help us escape from the situation that we're in. So what I want to do with you this evening, with your permission, is just to spend about 20 minutes thinking about personal and communal spaces in this time and beyond. Here's what I want to look at with you right now. I've been thinking a lot about space. Thanks so much. I've been thinking a lot about space and the spaces that we miss. And if you're looking at pictures of New York City, pictures of crowded places that are almost empty, there was a time when we thought emptiness was in some way a statement or an expression of holiness, the sense that the space was sanctified and quiet and serene. So what I wanted to do, if I can look down with you a little bit, for those of you just, if you're monitoring my screen, if we could look down a little, I want to look at this very famous American iconic site. This is the Rothko Chapel in Texas. So here's some TripAdvisor reviews of Rothko, the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas, and just go with me on this. It's an interesting discussion of space. The people on TripAdvisor who gave it 5 stars says this is a sacred space. It's intimate. It's not sectarian. It's minimalist, and you have to experience it to understand. And, you know, if you want a relaxing experience in an infinity space type of building where you feel your spirit soar and you get air conditioning to get out of the Houston heat, let's go to this space. But now, as we continue with the reviews and they change, let's go down a little, please, Aaron. Our 3-star says, I'm an artist, but I'm just not impressed with this. It's not me, but this person feels bad because everybody else loves this space. And then, of course, there's the 1-star. You're in a holy space. You're in a sacred space. You're in a space people love, an artistic space. And someone says, we don't like the atmosphere in this chapel. People were behaving strangely there. It's depressing. And one person says, this place is ugly and dark, and there's nothing to look at, and gives an awful vibe. And there's nothing peaceful or beautiful about this space at all. And it's a pointless waste of time. And I say that because here's an iconic space where people have lots of disagreements about what they feel in that space. And for us too, there are spaces we'll return to, and maybe spaces that we're in right now that have taken on a different interpretation in our mind's eye as a result of the situation that we're in. So I wanted to go to our own sacred space, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, when it was really the first major annual campaign, a wonderful campaign where there was too much money, and think about what this enterprise, this endeavor, this collective endeavor was all about for the Jewish people. So let's look at our holy buildings, empty buildings. Because in fact, when Moses, who orchestrated the building, and in cooperation with Bezalel, who was the architect, if you like, of the holy, when Moses finished the work, and I'm reading this with you from Exodus 40, you can see that right underneath our holy buildings, empty buildings. When Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent, and the presence of God filled the tabernacle, and Moses couldn't enter the tent of the meeting, because a cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, and the Israelites would set out on their journey. And when the cloud moved, they would move. But right now, no one was moving. All they did was finish this holy building, this building that was supposed to represent the interchange, the holy connection between God and God's people. But no one was inside it. No one was inside it because it was so holy that human beings weren't allowed in its presence. Moses left the space so that God could fill it. But in our relationship with God, we know that God has to contract in order to make room for human beings. That's the way we partner. So the immediate verse in a continuous scroll after the closing verse of Exodus is this verse in Leviticus. The word, not only the verse, the word, Vayikra, God called to Moses and said, come in. We're standing at that nexus right now where we've left our holy spaces. We've left the spaces that have meant the most to us. And we're waiting to be called back in. And sometimes we need someone to call us back in. And so I'd like to just take a quote from a French philosopher. What we are all more or less lacking at this moment is a new definition of what holiness looks like. A new definition, not our current definition. Some kind of changing way in which we regard space. I want to share with you a beautiful thought of Rabbi A.J. Heschel. He says one of the most distinguished words in the Bible is the word Kadosh, the word holy, a word more than any other, which is representative of the mystery and majesty of the divine. What was the first holy object in the world? Was it a mountain? Was it an altar? No, actually. The first use of Kadosh is in the book of Genesis at the end of creation. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. There's no reference in the record of creation to any object in space that would be endowed with the quality of holiness. That would come much later. Because if you create a holy space and the holy space gets destroyed, what happens to the people? But if you tell people, you are holy and time is holy, and you can sanctify time by making this time special, then even if I take away a building, I haven't taken away the essence of who you are, your very identity. One of the things I've observed, and it's been actually lovely to listen to the speeches, to the tributes this evening, is that you can take away a building, but you cannot take away the spirit of a community. You cannot take away giving. You cannot take away living. You cannot take away the things that define us, our families, our love for each other, our learning. Let's talk a little bit about how this plays out in terms of social distancing. As we know, and I'm not sure if it's lifted in your communities. We're in a gradual state here in the state of Maryland. The 15th will begin to open some things, not in my county, but in other counties. And I actually want to think about the first instance of social distancing in the Torah. And that's in Exodus 16:29. Remain every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So we have to restrict ourselves. There's a piece of Talmud in Eruvin that says this means that one has to restrict his movement to an area equal to his place. Can't really go far. We have to stay where we are. The idea of the Sabbath is not to travel far, but it's to build holiness where you are, at your table, with your family, with your friends. And then it says, well, how much is the area of someone's place? And it says it measures 3 cubits and an additional cubit so he can spread out his hands and feet. That's what Rabbi Meir says. But Rabbi Yehuda says a person's body measures 3 cubits and an additional cubit is needed to allow him to pick up an object. So there's an argument which says, how much is your personal space? And the conclusion is it's 4 cubits long. As we see in the end of this piece of Talmud, enough room to spread out your hands and feet. So that's your personal space, Daled Amot. And your president, in her recent community remarks, talked about 4 cubits, that there's a custom on Yom Ha'atzmaut to travel 4 cubits, which is approximately, guess what, 6 feet in the land of Israel, somewhere you've never been before. But 4 cubits is a measurement of lots of different kinds of personal space. It's the personal prayer space you should have so that people, when you're praying, particularly in intense times of prayer, you shouldn't be distracted by someone walking in front of you. So we give people 4 cubits of space. It's the closeness you should have before making a blessing on another person. You meet a king, you meet a particularly wise person of Israel extraction or someone else. You make a blessing on that person, a king, a strange person. They're blessings we make, but we can only make them when we're actually encountering that person in that person's space. It's the distance you have to separate yourself from a repulsive or smelly object before you pray. It's the distance between a person who's excommunicated and everyone else. It's the space you're allotted when you're buried. And it's a determinant in Jewish law of other aspects of personal space. It struck me as soon as the measurements of social distancing were out in the public, how similar this was to a legal text that was over 2,000 years old. The notion is that we have 6 feet of personal space, and we're honored in that space, and we protect that space. And you need to do that in a community which is so close to each other, where intimacy is so important. You also need to respect the individual and say, wait a minute, back off. We need some personal space. In fact, I was very struck by this statement in the Talmud Brachot. When the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, was destroyed, God also was left with nothing in this world but 4 cubits of Jewish law. God has everything. What does that mean that God only has 4 cubits of law? What it means is that when we study, we bring God into those 4 cubits. As the Kutzker Rebbe said, where is God to be found? God is found in the place where God is given entry. What's going to be resilience for us now and in the weeks ahead? It's being able to say that while we protect our personal space so that we can have community, we actually in our personal space have begun to recognize just how critical community, vibrant, loving, warm, communities are, not only to the existence of us as Jews, but across our globe. I want to share with you a thought that I came across in an educational journal, an article by L. Allison called The Resilient Leader. Resilience is often described as a personal quality that predisposes individuals to bounce back in the face of loss. Resilient leaders, however, do more than bounce back. They bounce forward. That's our blessing. That's our challenge. As we open the doors, the job isn't in Cleveland to bounce back. It's to bounce forward. So here's some things we might think about as our personal space, our Dalet Amot, becomes opened up to the collective space. How can what we've missed most about Jewish spaces help us prioritize what that space should be more of and less of? Who needs to be in our spaces who has never been there before? How do we continue using the outreach that we've developed online to serve underserved populations in need of access? So many elderly are able to participate in services, in study that we've never had before. And I want to share with you, in conclusion, a story I found on the internet. It was, my daughter sent it to me and I repurposed it here for you this evening, because I think it tells us a lot about how we'll think about this period moving forward. Our balance of personal space and communal space, how we protect the needs of the individual and honor them, while we build a community that everybody wants to be a part of, because there are chances for innovation now and inclusion that perhaps we have never had before. So here's my story. A child visiting a grandparent far in the future says, Zadie, were you alive during the time of COVID-19? And Zadie says, I was indeed. Zadie, in history class, I learned that thousands of people died around the world and families couldn't go to funerals. I learned that healthcare workers couldn't go home at night, that everyone had to stay indoors and wear masks outside. I heard that shuls closed their doors for months and people had to have their Passover Seders on a strange technology called Zoom. I heard that kids didn't go to school for weeks and weeks and many people lost jobs. All that is true, my grandson. There wasn't even toilet paper at a supermarket for a while. There were a lot of terrible things that happened during COVID-19. But I was little, and I remember it differently. I got to wake up late lots of mornings and do puzzles with my dad and plant a garden with my mom. I spent more time talking to my grandparents than I'd ever spent. My dad and I learned how to bake challah. My parents decided that our family needed more rituals together. So we started lighting Shabbat candles and putting our phones away. We live streamed the synagogue service and gave charity together to people in need. It was the first Seder we ever had that was just us. And it was fantastic. During COVID-19, my parents made the decision to get more involved when it was over. My dad joined a committee at the Federation and eventually became a community leader. We joined a JCC. When it was all over, my parents decided to be members of a synagogue and went to the rabbi's class. I went to Hebrew school for the first time, which is probably why you go to a Jewish day school today. And your mom lights candles every Friday night. We realized then, during COVID-19, how important it was to face the world together. So you're right, my sweet boy. It was a terrible time in a lot of ways, but I remember it differently. What decisions will you make now about yourself, your family, your community, your leadership, and your Judaism that will shape our shared future as a Jewish community? How will we remember this strange time in our lives when the doors open? On this night and in this crisis, let's remember that we don't only have memories, we make memories, we share memories, and we create the future that we want to see right now. Thank you. God bless you. Stay happy. Stay healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for that topical and inspiring talk. We all enjoyed it. There are a few questions coming in from the audience. If you have a moment or two, we can ask you a couple. Do you have suggestions for how we reconcile differing perspectives on Jewish communal space? For example, some who feel comfortable gathering together while others who do not.
I think this is a time where communication is particularly important. From a leadership perspective, I think it's really critical that we continue to be engaged as a caring and compassionate community with all those we serve, calling people regularly, seeing how they are. And I think that communication lends itself to this limbo transitional time. We need to ask people if they feel comfortable without judgment. And we need to make that quite clear. There are people who are demographically more challenged, and I think it's important that we honor their requests. And sometimes when we have a sense that perhaps members of our family aren't being careful enough, we need to actually restrict ourselves to make sure that everyone stays as healthy as they can. This is a matter of life and death. I don't have to remind any of you of that. I think pikuach nefesh, the value of life, is something that we all share, a value that we all share as a foundational value of Judaism. And so there's a lot at stake. And while it's such a temptation to go outside as places open, our caution can make a great difference in the lives of our community.
Thank you. Here's another one. I see many books on your bookshelves behind you. Mm-hmm. From whom and where do you find inspiration?
Well, certainly, welcome. Our Judaic Studies Library is upstairs, so 2 floors of books. So if I didn't go out for the next century, I'll be busy. I right now I find a great deal of inspiration being outdoors and being outdoors regularly, and taking inspiration from the beautiful spring that we've had despite it all. I take deep inspiration in my own prayer practice. I find inspiration in my grandchildren, and I just want to share, if it's okay with you, one little beautiful COVID moment. So my grandson, who is 22 months old, was quarantined with us. My daughter is a pediatric resident, so she has been on the front lines of this crisis and moved in the second week in March so that we could provide daycare. And my grandson said, come on, Safti, washing machine. So we went up the stairs to see the washing machine. And little Erez sat down, took his shoes and socks off and said, Man, Safti, and I took off my shoes and socks, and for the 32 minutes of that cycle, we watched the washing machine. And what a joy it was to look at his big brown eyes, looking at that spin cycle and saying, wow. And there was it reminded me of the importance of having a child's eyes and being able to see wonder, because the fact is, the wash was actually pretty interesting.
Terrific story. I think we have time for one more question. What changes beyond what you've shared have you seen as ways to build sacred space, knowing our new normal?
So I'm going to speak from an educator perspective, as part of a university that had to pivot for thousands of students. I have taught people in South Africa, in Australia, in Israel, in Hungary in the past weeks. The reach has been incredible. The capacity to reach people who are isolated, not only those who are geographically far apart, but who are isolated in our communities, is incredible. And so I don't think that we're going to kind of master Zoom and then let it go when this is all over. I think it's incumbent upon us to find ways to introduce technology and strengthen our technological reach, because I think we're realizing, I watch my daughter who works with special needs camps online and special needs families, and the kind of work that we can do I think for me, I went personally from being, I would say, existentially really stunned by what was happening to seeing this as one of the most amazing educational opportunities that I've ever had. And I think we should all be viewing it that way. Whether you're a synagogue, a JCC, a federation, we can be doing so much more of this, and we can do it so much better. So let's do it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. Thanks so much for the terrific and meaningful comments this evening. What a wonderful evening, Cleveland. Thank you, Jewish Cleveland, for being here with us tonight.
And on behalf of everyone you help through your time and support of the Federation, thank you for making an impact together. Please stay safe and good night.